fact, today I was just checking the minimum wage in Togo. And the minimum wage in Togo they call it SMIC, Salaire Minimal Interprofessionnel or something, SMIC. It's 52,500 CFA. So you can check. 52,500 CFA. Monthly, yes. If you check your currency thing, it's about 1,100 or so. It's about 1,130 or so cedis. And unless I'm mistaken, I think our minimum wage is 19 cedis 97. 1997 a day. If you multiply it, yeah, and normally it's multiplied by 27 working days. You don't get half. Togo. Even though they consider them theirs low. You know, so, and we know that this minimum wage does not really, you can't live on it. So that's something that we have to address very, very seriously. Organized labor, if we are talking about social justice, properly speaking. And then there's a question of pensions and social protection. And here, the TUC itself acknowledges that only 1/5 of the eligible labor force who should have social protection are under pension scheme in this country. Less than 20%. And if you take the social security scheme, it meets only 3 of 9 contingencies that are provided under the ILO Convention 102. Of course, contingencies like maternity, sickness, and injury are provided as employer liability. But what this shows is that in terms of social protection, there is clearly a long way to travel. And then, if I take the question of participation as an element of social justice, one that requires marginalized people to have a voice, a real voice in the decisions that affect their lives. The question that has to be posed is, to what extent can the TUC claim that it has been able to assure this participation? And this is linked to our own questions of internal democracy in the TUC. Of course, I know that in the last 2 decades especially, considerable effort has been done to create room for our women and also our youth. And these days, I know that prior to our congresses, we have youth and women's congresses. But we need to ask ourselves whether we've reached where we want to go in terms of women and youth participation. Because unless you have that, then you can't say that you have serious participation, you know, as an element of social justice that you want to promote. And I link that also, crucially, to the difficulty that the TUC has always had with keeping its district and regional councils of labor active. As far back as 1948, when the executive board met and they wanted to go to the colonial authorities, they activated their trade councils at the time. So very early in its history, the TUC has known that the district councils are important for participation and for mobilization. But it has been ad hoc, and I will entreat leadership to pay close attention if we really want to promote participation of our membership, and to do whatever it takes, and not just, you know, pay lip service. And the fourth other area that I want to mention is the TUC and African Trade Union Movement. And here, I want to just recall that a TUC associated with the International Trade Union Movement very early. In the early 50s, it already had relations with the World Federation of Trade Unions, which was then existing. And then later on, into the late 50s, it also developed relations with the ICFTU, the International Confederation of Free Trade Unions. In fact, in 1959 or so, no, it's 1959, earlier, on one occasion, between, was it Texnocran and Tetegan? Texnocran was General Secretary. At that time, they didn't have Secretary, I had General Secretary. And they had an invitation to attend a conference, Moscow, in the WFTU conference in Moscow. And the TUC was not sure whether it would go or shouldn't go, and actually decided that it didn't want to go, at least at executive level. Meanwhile, the WFTU had not been properly informed, so I think they sent a ticket to in the General Secretary's name, and the General Secretary traveled to Moscow for the conference. By the time he came back, he had been removed. But by the early 60s, there was considerable tension between the WFTU on the one hand and the ICFTU on the other hand. And so in Africa, as I mentioned earlier, Tetegan had been deployed in the early 60s to, support the founding of ATOF, together with unions from Algeria and a few others. And then, so they developed as one All-Africa Trade Union Federation. And then they developed also in Africa, the African Trade Union Confederation, another wing. And in fact, these two trade union centers in Africa mirrored the divisions in the OAU. In the OAU, when the OAU was going to be formed in 1963, there was a lot of jockey and caucusing. And they developed the so-called Monrovia Group and Casablanca Group. The Monrovia Group was supposed to be those who were very conservative. They didn't want any shaking of the boat. And the Casablanca Group were those who wanted African unity immediately, and all that. So at the trade union level, ATOF was Casablanca and ATUC. But then they also had relations with the International Trade Union Movement, ICFTU on the one hand and WFTU on the other hand. So, and those divisions, they didn't augur well for the African Trade Union Movement. So early in the 70s, under the auspices of the OAU at the time, the Organization of African Trade Union Unity was formed as a means to unite all these ATOF, ATUC, and then some other formation which had also emerged in 1973. And the TUC, and in fact, its headquarters is here. The Secretary General, current one, is here. So it tells you how prominent Ghana was in those deliberations. Now, and Ghana has continued to be active in the African Trade Union Movement. You know that in 2007, TUC hosted the founding Congress of ITUC Africa, which had brought together the ICFTU Afro, which was the regional organization of ICFTU, and the WCL, World Confederation of Labor, its regional organization. And over the last decade and more, the regional organization was active considerably in the defense and promotion of trade union rights around the continent. And in fact, in 2005 or 6, I'm not sure anymore immediately, but I remember Ghana TUC hosted a delegation from Zimbabwe, union leaders from Zimbabwe, to help us understand the situation in Zimbabwe. Because, as you know, Mugabe was quite popular among Africans. And many people did not quite understand the difficulties or the nature of the crisis in Zimbabwe. The nature of the crisis, which made it such that it was even difficult to organize unions there. And the unions, were ready to undertake a tour. We gave them space to come here and inform and discuss with us. And in fact, we likewise, I remember, sent a delegation to Zimbabwe, to try to support them, a delegation of solidarity. So Ghana TUC has been active in the African trade union movement. And in recent times, you know that on questions of trade, on questions of debt, the TUC has worked closely. And also, trade, not just economic partnership agreements, but more recently on the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, the TUC has worked closely with the ITUC Africa, in trying to bring Africa's voice onto the scene. So, with this history, let's look at ourselves today and ask ourselves what should be occupying us very importantly. And I want to remind us that the TUC was born under colonialism. 80 years after, we are under new colonialism. And this is no joke. I mean, this is not the occasion to get into detail on new colonialism, but at least just a few things will tell us. I mean, if you consider that the kind of resource extraction and exploitation that went on under colonialism is still going on, and there is still unequal trade, no question about that. Today in Ghana, when we talk about debt and financial control as a result of debt over us, I don't think anybody can question it because we've seen it too well and its effects on us. And the kind of control that we have through the financial institutions, international financial institutions, particularly IMF and World Bank, is very clear. So when I say that we are under new colonialism, I'm not just being rhetorical, and it's not a joke. But also alongside the new colonialism is a changing world of work. The changing world of work, where today there's such a diverse, array of contracts of employment. Jobs previously, which were permanent jobs, now have been made, either projects or short-term jobs. Even in the banks, we have platform work, as it's called, and sometimes people are engaged in a way that it's not even clear whether they are self-employed or they are somebody's employees. So the world of work has changed. And with these conditions, with this changed world of work, and these conditions that we live under today, what should be the things that concern us most? What should be the imperatives that drive us as labor? The first point I would like to draw attention to is that we must unite the organized. We must unite the organized. And we must critically address the fragmentation of trade unions in Ghana. At independence, the records talk about 80 or so unions, house unions, which were then considered too many by the early leaders. 94. They were considered too many. And the early leaders strategized on how to get them together. Of course, at the time, the law helped them to bring it together. But they knew that they needed to get together. Today, there are more than 150 registered unions, according to the TUC's records, which I checked. According to the last Congress statement, there are more than 150 registered unions and workers' associations. And still counting. And some of them are enterprise-based unions. So there's a lot of work to do. We need to reach out. We need to work in uniting those who are already organized. Because if you are organized and everybody is in a small corner, how are you going to deal with these questions that we have raised about even living wage and social protection? Not to talk about the larger questions which affect others in the society. And then the second major imperative, in my view, is to organize the organized. To organize the unorganized. Both in the formal and informal economy. Because there are many formal sectors, small enterprises, which don't have unions and which could do with unions. Sometimes our unions behave like capitalists, union leaders. You are going to organize and you are thinking of the money that you have to use to organize. And you think that those people will not bring in enough dues. Of course, the dues is important for your ability to work. But then if you don't organize and strengthen them, how are they going to get better wages to be able to pay better dues? So we have to think long term. And especially where, if you look at even the enterprises, they know how to get together when they are small, to get together with others for survival. So we need to pay attention, to bring the unorganized into our fold. And when we think of the informal economy people, we should not be thinking of bringing them in as second-class members, as full-time, as full members. And if we organize them with appropriate methods, I believe that we will get there. And in fact, in that sense, the cooperative sector, the whole question of the cooperatives, is something that we must be paying attention to, because that can help us get into the informal economy in a serious way. The third will be what I'll call embracing social movement unionism. So union movement, you don't sit in your corner. You understand that to pursue the objectives of social justice, you need to reach out to other groups in society. Student groups, faith-based organizations, consumer associations. We need to reach out to others. Also reaching out to labor, we are talking about uniting with others who are organized. But as labor, we need to reach out to others to be able to address the broad issues that face us as a whole. And remember, under neocolonialism, it's not just you, it's all of us. So we need to band together in a strong way. And then we also need to lead the policy debate. Already, of course, I know that the TUC has developed the habit of making its input into budget before government comes. It does its budget and all that. But I think there's something we should strengthen even more. And in doing that, we will be positioning ourselves to address the kind of issues that have been raised in terms of living wage itself social protection, and the kind of rights that are so important for us in this fast-changing world. And it is also in looking at the policy question seriously that we can address the question of workers' capital and the issue of pension funds and their use. I'd also like to suggest that we need to invest seriously in the next generation. We should pay attention to the youth structures and mentor young leaders to ensure that the movement is regularly renewed. In that connection, we must also invest heavily in education and research, and not just pay lip service. We must do so with the understanding that real commitment that arises from understanding where we are as a people, the things that are important for us, those are the things that will help us to do things for ourselves. So education is important. If people are educated and they understand their environment, they can help themselves much more easily. So whatever it takes, many years ago, we started talking about a special fund for education. It's been on the cards for many years, but I think it's about time that the union began to roll that out in a serious way. My final imperative that I want to draw attention to will be the Pan-African solidarity. We must continue to strengthen ties with other unions in Africa so that we can tackle together the things that affect all of us. Because the things that affect us here in Ghana are quite similar to what is happening all around the continent. So let me conclude by paying tribute to those who have gone before us, those who started this movement, and their sacrifices, our leaders who have gone before. And to underline the importance of mobilizing workers to achieve social justice. That requirement is more important now than ever before. It's more relevant now than ever. It's just that the tools are changing, and we must seek to change with them. I do hope that the coming decades will be one of bold adaptation and innovation, and that the 80th anniversary will be a launch pad, not just a milestone, but a launch pad into major achievement for the TUC. The future of workers in Ghana, I believe, depends on the TUC and its allies and how it works to close ranks. And I would like to urge a sober reflection on and a commitment to the TUC's mission statement, which is to unite all workers of Ghana into an independent and democratic organization for improved working and living conditions through collective action, solidarity, and social partnership based on the principles of fairness and justice. And I remind us of the TUC's core values and principles, which are democracy, independence, solidarity, social partnership, and fairness and equality. Thank you.
Please keep going, keep going. Thank you. Thank you so much for giving us a reflection of ourselves.